I will step back. I'm just going to. Colleagues, thank you very much for joining. We have a full house, I see. I'm just going to say a few words to open, but this discussion on participatory monitoring and environmental management, particularly in the mining sector, I think comes at a very good time, because when those who followed the discussions today, also within the UN World Bank report and the discussions on conflict prevention, sustaining peace, etc., when we see actually what are some of the areas that we call areas of contestation, one of those key areas is actually the issues around access to resources, access to land, access to natural resources. Other areas of contestation, of course, around political power, access to services, access to justice and security. But when we zoom into one of those areas of contestation, particularly around land and natural resources, I think this is what this discussion is going to be about. And I'm very happy to see, the turnout. We've been working very closely together between the governance team and the sustainable development team on these issues. We have a great project together, and I'm very proud of that. And so I will not say anything more. I hand over to the colleagues who are going to drive the discussion. I think Vesna will say a few words, and then we'll hand over to other colleagues. So thank you all for being here. I hope we have a very interesting discussion.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you all for coming. It's really amazing to see such a big group in such a short notice also. Thank you. Patrick already put our today's conversation in context. I will just add a few words about the contest in general, especially when it comes to the fact that we all know that the Secretary General did make the prevention as the priority for the UN. It also, the conversation that we are going to have today fits into our new administrator dedication to innovation and partnerships. That's something that we are also proud to show here, because this is done. The work that we are doing in land, natural resources, and conflict prevention is done very, very much in partnership with within UN, within UNDP, then within UN, and then also with the civil society, governments, international cooperation partners, etc. Patrick already mentioned SDGs and sustainable development goals, which sustainable development goals and sustaining peace resolution. Both of those documents actually provide a very shared, comprehensive understanding of how the conflict prevention should be organized and how the work should be done. I would just underline two elements of organized prevention, which are basically strong partnership and early action. And that brings us to the issue of tools for the early action, and that are quite often developed in partnership. And I'm really glad that one of those tools is going to be introduced today. Also, we're all aware of the lack of access to land, water, natural resources, etc., especially on inclusion when it comes to women. So hopefully through implementation of those tools, we will help, eliminate those kind of exclusion and discrimination. Just in October, we actually had a good exchange on one of the tools that we jointly use in Latin America again, on land, natural resources, and conflict prevention, mostly on extractives, which is a dialogue, multi-stakeholder dialogue. We had a very good conversation between 9 Latin American countries. So that's one of the tools that we would also be very happy to share more with you later on. But that being said, I think we already provided enough of introductory words. It's a real pleasure, to have here with us today Flaviano is a presenter of this new tool, which is participatory environmental monitoring. Is that what the tool is called? And right now, I would actually like to give the floor to Sarah, who would moderate today's meeting, and welcome you all again. Thank you so much. And Flavio, it's a real pleasure having you today with us.
I'm just going to stand so I can see everyone. And thanks everyone for coming. I know it was very short notice and there are many things happening this summer year, so we appreciate your time and interest in this topic. So I'm just going to say a few things about UNDP's work on participatory environmental monitoring before I pass the floor to Flaviano. So my name is Sarah Deitch. I work on extractive issues and conflict prevention here at UNDP. I work with CASPER in the Sustainable Development Cluster, but I also support some initiatives of the Environmental Governance Program with Anne and Sana, who are the project managers of that program. So it's a cross-cluster initiative, as was mentioned, between governance and peace building and sustainable development. So the rest of our session today, of course, it was mentioned, but one of the SDGs that the participatory monitoring work focuses on is 16, so peace, justice, and strong institutions. But in addition, it also touches on health, SDG 16, and clean water, SDG 6, amongst others. So a small outline for the rest of our time together today. Flaviano will be speaking, and we tried to dedicate a good chunk of our time today for some discussion and some Q&A, and perhaps some of you have experiences with this type of work that you also may want to pick Flaviano's brain while he's here with us. Okay, so just a very brief introduction to the UNDP's collaboration with the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. So the purpose of this project is to improve environmental governance in mining, and it focuses on how human rights principles are integrated into the work of environmental agencies in governments. So we work with governments in emerging producer countries, mineral producing countries, and the 4 pilot countries where the work has been ongoing is Colombia, Kenya, Mongolia, and Mozambique. So today we will really focus on one initiative of that larger project, and it's participatory environmental monitoring. So UNDP has a project that is just getting ramped up under this program on participatory monitoring. It's an initiative under EGP, but it's led by our Latin America hub, and several who are joining us online are actually from the Panama hub who are doing this work with us. So hello, and hopefully the technology is working. But also, just so everyone here knows, it's not a closed session. We do have some colleagues joining us online, as well as some others from the GOXI platform, which is a platform we at UNDP share with the World Bank on good governance and extractive. So a few others in the online space. We at UNDP are working together on this particular initiative with an agency in Canada called the Canadian International Resources and Development Institute. And based on their previous research, we know that enabling communities affected by mining to participate more actively in monitoring environmental effects can actually help to reduce conflict, particularly on water and environmental issues. So the most information we have, and I think Flaviano will get more into how this works, but the information we have from previous research comes from Peru, quite a bit of it. In the 2000s, there was a huge boom in commodities in mining, and that led to greater demand. And as such, that led to quite a drastic increase in mining, intensiveness of mining in Peru in particular. So that country has an ombuds body for complaints and issues and disputes. And the data they collected found that by 2012, the majority of all conflicts that came through the ombuds office were actually social and environmental conflicts, which were driven by disputes between companies and communities around mining. And the vast majority of those disputes, up to 75%, were actually related to water issues. So very specifically, environmental issues driven by mining. So as a result, in Peru, they decided to create participatory environmental monitoring committees. So as of now, it's over 140 committees that are active there, which is quite an incredible number. So there's been some work. I know some of Flaviano's work has been there, or is continuing to be there. He just came back from Peru, actually. But we found that committees are actually making a contribution to preventing conflict in those countries. So as Vesna mentioned, it's one of the tools in the toolkit. So as UNDP, we wanted to better understand how are those committees functioning and what are the attributes that are making them work in both in Peru, but also we wanted to better understand 4 other countries, a total of 5 countries in Latin America that our work in 2018 will focus on. So, as mentioned, this links to quite a number of the SDGs 16, but also 3, 6, and others. So, a few more words about this before I pass it on, but the committees work often in remote and difficult environments, and they're not without challenges. So it's not a panacea solution for every problem, but it's still challenges for the committees, including that sometimes communities affected who are participating in monitoring have a deep distrust of the companies that they're working with or that they're monitoring the activities of. There can also be sometimes a lack of coordination of the committees with local or regional government bodies. Sometimes they're working in isolation and their work is not well integrated into what government is doing. There are also funding limitations, sometimes a lack of any formal legal framework to support the work these committees are doing. And what we also see at times is that gender inequalities are replicated in the committees themselves, so a real challenge as to how to make them better gender representative and include women and other members of the communities that are affected by many issues. So given that there's been some promising results of the committee's work in Peru, while knowing there are still challenges, we thought our project would help to better understand how these committees are working, and our goal is that we want to identify ways to build, strengthen, and institutionally support these committees. So the findings that we are collecting as of January on the work of these committees in the 5 countries will be shared at a regional dialogue that's planned in 2018 in July, and we anticipate that this will position UNDP to continue working to support these committees in monitoring the environmental effects of mining. And we think this will actually improve governance in the sector and help to prevent socio-environmental conflict. And we also see the committees as it's tripartite, or government, company, and community members. So it's a form of multi-stakeholder dialogue, which is another tool we know can be very useful in working through conflict. So without any further delay, I'd really like to pass the floor to Flaviano. So Flaviano Bianchini, is the founder and director of Source International. He's an Ashoka fellow, and his studies on extractive industries' impact in environment and health have led to changes in mining law in Honduras, the adoption of precautionary measures by the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in Guatemala, where he's done quite a lot of work, as well as adoption of laws on the welfare for the city of Cerro de Pasco in Peru. So one of the things Flaviano has done in the last decade is found the NGO Source International, and Source focuses on working with communities who face environmental pollution issues and health problems that are caused by the extractive industries. Source provides free scientific and technical support to local communities to assess environmental damage and to promote restorative relations. And another aspect of their work is to build local capacity for developing environmental monitoring systems that are ongoing. So in addition to all of this, Flaviano is also a friend of the Environmental Governance Program. He sits on the advisory board. And beyond that, he's just a great resource and a great support to us because we constantly ask him questions and he never ignores our emails. And we're very grateful to have him join us here today. So thank you, Flaviano, and welcome. And I'll pass the floor to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all of you for coming. I'll try to be as short as possible to leave some more space to the further discussion. So this is New York, and we're all familiar with it. So imagine that this red part, where probably someone is living, one day becomes like this. This is Cerro de Pasco in Peru. The size of the mine is like 3 miles for 2 miles for half mile deep. And there's no Manhattan, there was no Manhattan there, but still there was a 400-year-old church. There was the main square of the city. There was 6,000 people's house and a couple of roads, a railway, and a lot of facilities that has been destroyed in the last 40 years for the building of the mine. And as you see on this gigantic pit, what they extract is normally 1 gram or 2 grams per ton. All the rest is waste. So all the city is basically a huge battles for space between mining waste and the people. So there are kids playing soccer under the mining waste, and the hospital is also surrounded by mining waste. So all the area is a huge fight between company and communities in order to find a space where you can, community want to build a house, and you company want to build, want to put your waste. And then there is the problem of the water. This is the discharge water of the mine, and this water contains lead 4,000 times over the limit. And it contains enough aluminum that 86 liters of the water contains the same amount of aluminum that is in a can. Like a real can. And for 20 years, they throw the water into the lake, Laguna Yanamate, that is, it used to be a wonderful lake at 4,400 meters on the sea levels in the Andes. And nowadays, it's so polluted that they have put a fence around it. If you go in, it's a risk to die. So it's that risk if you go into, close to the lake. Where 20 years ago, they used to drink that water. So it's not, I hope nobody of you is surprised that there's a huge conflict going on in Cerro de Pasco. So there are people who say, we need the money because we need a job. On the other side, there are people who say, we cannot exchange our health for a job. 100% of the kids of the city contains, they have concentration of lead in their body, blood or hair, that are more than 4 times the limits. 100%. So it's a huge problem of issues that are cancer issues that are going on, skin disease, miscarriage. A lot of people that actually are dying for this. There are 15. So the congenital malformation are 15 times higher than the national average. So when we move, if now we move 40 kilometers far away, and we go to Caruamayo is just another small town, 40 kilometers down. It's an indigenous communities of Quechua people. Pretty much the same area, 4,000 meters of elevation gain. It's a farmer communities. They survive. Their main income is the production of maca. Maca is like, I bring it to just one. It's like this is a small tuber that is considered a very healthy food, so they export this maca to the United States, to Europe. And last year, a Canadian mining company wanted to open a mine there. Of course, they know the example of Cerro de Pasco, and they didn't want the mine. And another huge conflict coming up. So they stopped the road, a couple of people died, the blockage. Cerro de Pasco, we have already seen more than 20 people die in the last 20 years for protesters. And so there is a huge fight between the company, the government, and the local community. How can we avoid this? How can we enable the community of Caruamayo to control and having then a mining inside their territories? The only way is that for them to receive a mine is to control themselves the mine. So I'm a scientist by formation, and 12 years ago, just before graduation, I came across the problem of pollution caused by mining industries in Guatemala. I went to Guatemala and I lived there for a couple of years, and I was very young and very motivated. So I was like, yeah, I will monitor the mine, but that's as soon as I was, even if I was young, I realized pretty soon that I was unable to monitor all the mines of the world. And even if with a big team, it's kind of impossible, So how to deal with that easily? It's the community who has to monitor the mine. And there are a lot of issues, a lot of reasons why it's the community that have to do it. First of all, because they are there. Second, they know the environment. Third, they are the affected one. Fourth, they need to be there. They cannot move. I mean, so they must control the mine. But that 10 years ago was something really out of the blue, because there were no examples of communities controlling the mine. Nowadays, we've seen in Peru, we've seen in Colombia, in Guatemala, the community where I was working 10 years ago, they start to monitor the mine, they're still monitoring it. So, but what is monitored and how? But the first thing is, nowadays, this is all the projects that we have as Source International. So all the projects where you have some communities having control over mining companies or oil companies. And now sometimes we also monitor different issues like agribusiness or waste management facilities. As I said, the first thing is water. Sarah was pretty clear, in Peru, the majority of the conflict is for water. People in Carguamayo, they are afraid that their water would be like the water in Cerro de Pasco. So their major concern is water. But the water is easy to control. It's actually probably the easiest one and the cheapest one. Because don't forget that we are talking about local indigenous farmers communities. So cutting down the cost is a priority. This small instrument that we are using in Mexico and that we are using also here in Mongolia, it's a $500 instrument that measures pH, conductivity, temperature. Nothing particularly complicated, nothing particularly high science, but something very useful because there are parameters that change pretty quickly. If there is a spill, if there is a kind of pollution, those parameters change. So if the community can control it pretty often, then they can see the change. And with that easy Excel file that everybody can manage, they can see there are change. And when there is a change, they can take the sample, preserve the sample with a small 2 milliliters drops of nitric acid and ship it to a lab. And then they can get themselves the results, for example, of heavy metals pollution. That, when we talk about mining, is one of the main issues. So they can really know the water today is drinkable. This week, normally they monitor once a week. So this week is drinkable, next week is drinkable, then something happened, it's no more drinkable. They can use that, ship to the labs, and meanwhile go to deal with the government or the company to have at least a temporary compensation of clean water, for example. But also dust. This is an IOM, it's called IOM breather. So it's basically, it's a 2 centimeters diameter, so it's like the same size of our mouth and nose. And this small pump breathes 4 liters per minute, so that it's what we normally breathe in average. And you can put it in a place, leave there for 12 hours, control as he's doing with a mobile phone, and control how much dust is breathing and which type of dust. If there is heavy metals in the dust, for example, that is one of the main reasons why lead and arsenic and aluminum goes into the bodies. Or otherwise, you can also click on it and, for example, give it to a kid and leave the kid for 12 hours in a day with this breathing there. And at the end of the day, you know how much dust the kids are breathing. Or even to workers. And that is particularly true when we talk about underground mines. So you can give it to a worker for 12 hours, he goes into the mine, and when he can out, you take the sample and you know how much he has, how much metal he has breathed. And then there is the perception, of course. So community mapping, an instrument that we use pretty often is the human rights impact assessment tools that is used to measure from a community perspective all the human rights situation, the water situation, and the health situation. And that's, especially working on health, indirectly works a lot on gender balance, because 90% of the time we work on health, it's are women inside the community. And so, and also because women normally, that's 2 reasons why. The first one is that women are normally more in contact with water, because they wash dishes, they wash the clothes, they wash the kids. I mean, and secondly, because one of the main issues that comes out when there is a huge pollution, especially from heavy metals, is miscarriage. And of course, you need women to talk about that. You cannot, I mean, they will never talk to a man about their miscarriage situation. But also, we can use, this is in Amazon forest, and a $200 GPS can be used to map all the source of water, for example. We all know that the human rights to water is pretty well codified in which how far your water should be from your house. But then how to measure is not always easy. But there are instruments today that really enable you to measure these indigenous communities in the Peruvian Amazon forest. They measure how far is the water from every single house. So if they are within the range of what is considered right for human rights water. But it's important that so you set up a committee that is normally like 2, 4, 6, maybe even 10 persons. But it's important in order to avoid conflicts to involve the entire community. Otherwise, you can have conflicts between the committee and the community. So this is the case of Carrizalillo in Mexico. The committee is made by 6 persons, 3 men and 3 women. They go out once a week to take water samples. The committee should be, when they go out, there should be at least 3, but with 1 man or 1 woman in it. So, because again, you have to consider that we are in a countryside, so they are farmers, they have to do their job, they're not professionals, so you cannot pretend that they go every week, everybody. So they can organize themselves, but once in a while, normally once a year, maybe twice a year, they go all together with most of possible people from the community. Again, there won't be all, this is a 1,600 people community, and we had these days, I think, 120 persons, but still, it's kind of almost 10% of the community. So basically, one every family, and it goes to a field visit. And then, so it goes really to the mine. They will show them where they take samples, how to do it, and it's kind of involve the entire communities. Now, of course, it's easier when you have smaller communities, like in Cerro de Pasco with 70,000 inhabitants, would it be more difficult? But still, it's important that you share and that you do everything much more open as possible. And that it also came out like meaning of communication. You must communicate what are you doing and the results. And again, we have to adapt to their local reality. So internet is not as, for us today, communicate something is just posting on the web and everybody with a smartphone can read it. But in some places, it's not like this. So old style of communication, we use poster. We go to the church on Sunday. In Latin America, it's pretty, if you go on Sunday morning at the church is where you probably get most of the people. All community radios. Community radios are an incredible tool that you can use in pretty much, in Latin America, but also in Asia and in Africa, they are very common. So it's very good tool to communicate inside the community. And then the next step is also communicate outside the community. The monitoring systems must be open also to the government and to the companies. So it's not an antagonist of the monitoring done by companies and government. It is a complementary tool. So it's something that should be done as much open as possible. So at the end of the day, it's the importance of community-based monitoring system is that gives the community the control over their resources, so the community perceive themselves that they are controlling what is happening. So they feel trained. It's empower community because they give them skills and tools, and also enable the cohesion among the community. And so therefore, it's also empower their strength, their resilience. So if there is a problem, they detect it very soon, so they can adapt to that. That's the sample of the water. There is water that this week we measured is polluted, so we go straight away to the company and the government to ask for at least a temporary remediation of clean water. Meanwhile, that we are figure out what is happening in the region. Empowers women inside community, because we've seen about the committees are always in gender balance, and especially with the health issues, women are on the first line. It monitors human rights very often, then prevent abuses and prevent companies' misconduct. If the company knows that the community is monitoring the water, it's less likely that they throw the water like they do in Cerro de Pasco, just throwing it from a pipe with 1,000 times the limits pollutant. It also prevents corruption, because again, one of the most common way of corruption is often like between the company and the government, on the monitoring. So the government is supposed to monitor, but then at the end they never do it because there is kind of corruption at the top or lower level. But if the community is controlling it, they are kind of forced to do it. And then it also, we have seen that it also strengthens a lot the internal communication of the community. So it really gives to the community a more sustainable way of stay together, you know, because it's kind of the internal communication over the monitoring. It's also an opportunity to have internal communication over other issues like land tenure, leadership, or things like that. And then one of the key points is that help community to get better deals. The community we have seen in Carrizalillo and Guerrero, when a company starts, they get basically nothing. They have a compensation for the use of land of $100 for manzanas, that is like $260 per acre. It's pretty much nothing. But when they start the monitoring, and so they start to understand which was their position, which human rights they were abused, and the water situation and everything, after 1 year of monitoring, they were able to price this compensation in a price that is fixed to the gold price. So they will receive for every acre 5 ounces, the price of 5 ounces of gold. That means at this point almost $7,000. So from $100 to $7,000 as a deal for the use of their land, their communal land. We're talking about communal land, so no private land. So it's really an instrument that enables community to get good deals with companies instead of just sometimes take the first deal that they have. As promised, I was short. So we have plenty of time.
So thank you, Flaviano. Quite interesting to hear about how it's been used in your work and some of the images. The prevention of company misconduct, preventing waste and preventing corruption, and also the tool of using the monitoring committees, being able to use the information to gather as leverage in their negotiations with companies. So I'm sure our colleagues in the room have some questions. I'd like to take maybe 2 or 3 questions at a time. Is that okay for you? Okay, so then we can get more in. And please identify yourself and where you work, and then ask a question, and we'll take 3.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm James. I work with the climate department, but I used to do environmental sampling a lot. So basically, I imagine a lot of times you'll get like kind of with these sorts of results, like 0, 0, 0, 1,000 times back 0, 0, 0. There's a good chance that the sampling results will show that there's nothing. So I was wondering overall, do you see trends of concentrations going down? Is it working? And what sort of legal teeth do these sorts of committees have? Yeah. Because there's usually a lot of very detailed methodologies to, you have to send it to a special lab and all that stuff. So can you use these sort of results in a legal form?
Thank you, James. We'll take a couple more questions. Yes, please.
Kumir Mohammed, DPA. My question related to what the extent to which, for example, you noted the antagonism with the corporations. Have they been responsive to, for example, the information that is coming out from these communities? And in situations where there is a clash in terms of between the government and the community and the corporation, what mediation, sort of conflict resolution capacities do these instruments have?
Thank you. One more question before Flaviano dives in. Okay, we'll go with 2.
Well, the first one, it depends which kind of pollution. As you said, if there is a spill, of course, it's 0, 0, 0, 1,000, 0, 0, 0. So in the moment you have 1,000, you take a sample and you should allow to understand what is this 1,000. In case of other type of pollution, like leaking, so it got 1, 0, 0, 0, 3, 8, 10, and then you see the trend, and then you can identify the source. Same for long-term pollution like acid rock drainage, for example. That is one of the major problem in mining activities. It's a chemical phenomenon that starts with waste rocks when they are exposed to oxygen and water. So this phenomenon starts and takes a lot of years to start, but then it takes really thousands of years to stop. And when it starts, you will see a slowly 1, 2, 3, and then it goes to 1,000 and stay 1,000 for millennials. So that's so you can actually identify which kind of pollution it is. The second part of your question was, is it that useful for a legal? No, unfortunately not. But so that's why they take the samples and then probably they call us and then we take. If we see that the situation is very serious, then we do the first flight and go there and then we take the legal part because we can take samples that are legally valued. Of course, a farmer cannot take a sample that can be used legally in a court. But at the same time, the idea is that doing this, they force governments and companies to do it legally. Or otherwise, we, as sort of international or other NGOs, can go and do it for the legal aspects. And what I mean for us, the most problematic issues is not that much the 0,000, 000. Is more the long-term pollution. So the pollution that then starts and goes for years, because I mean the spills make the news, but at the end it lasts a few days, and probably after those days the environment has a resilience, so it can kind of it takes a while, of course. It's not just a spill 2 days and then after 3 days I drink the water, but probably after a couple of years you can re-drink the water. But the long-term pollution, there is several studies of acid rock drainage that pollute for 3,000 years. In Italy, we have in the Elba Island, actually, it's a small island in Tuscany, there is a mine that was used by the Etruscans, so the one that was before the Romans, that still pollutes. So it's more than 2,000 years that the mine is closed and it's still polluting. And there are studies in the US, in California, for example, the Rusted mine, that they study that they will pollute for 3,000 years more. So we are more interested in control that kind of pollution. I think it's more relevant than the spill. Despite the fact that the spill make huge disaster, but it's kind of controlled. And normally, because the spills goes into the news, there are always some contingency plan that takes action after there is a spill. While this kind of pollution that I haven't had a contingency plan, so it goes forever. Now that's always the problem.
Conflict prevention.
Conflict, yeah. So and that's a very good question, because from some point of view, this can also trigger the conflict.
Yeah.
So the conflict prevention is very important, and I think because when the community knows that the company is polluting their water, it's not 100% guaranteed that they won't react in a conflictive way. But that's the point of having set up a real committee, that it's all the community involved and that it's open, and that the company and the government knows that the committee is there, and so all the procedure and the control of the committee. Sometimes there is also the monitoring committee and the steering committee who control the monitoring committee. And normally when they have the data of their monitoring, then they publish first among all the community, and then goes to the company and the government. So it's kind of all the process kind of open in order to avoid the conflict clash. The response of the government and the company changed a lot. Some companies react very well, like, okay, we recognize there is a problem, so now we're gonna start together, work together. Some not. Some just say, well, but you are using $500 instrument, doesn't work. I have my analysis with my $20,000 instrument that says the opposite. So in those cases, it is important to the intervention of the government or a third body, that sometimes it's Social International itself or other organization that try to do conflict resolution and mediate between the two different actors. But on the long term, I really believe that science, in that case, and monitoring can be a common ground of dialogue between company, government, and communities. Especially because with the absence of it, the conflict is 100% guaranteed. Because as soon as you have a mind, even mentally, I mean psychologically, when you have this gigantic pit in the middle of your town or close by, and one day you get sick, the first thing you think is their fault. that's a nice human. Maybe you're sick for a virus that is not related to it, but your first thinking is it's their fault. And then the conflict is mostly, I won't say 100%, but 90% guaranteed when you don't have non-control.
Yes, we'll take another round of questions, but first we have a question from one of our colleagues online from the UNDP office in Peru. So it's from Ana Cecilia, and her question was about the Cerro de Pasco example that you shared, and she wants to know if there's any documentation or publication that's available on the intervention that was done and the work of the committee in that setting.
Yes, there is, and it will be next week, next Monday. They're gonna present it to the, we've actually presented to the government on November the 3rd at the Parliament of Peru. I've been there 3 days ago and we presented it at the university in Cerro de Pasco. And on next Monday, they will present it to the ministries. So that's also I mean, you have to make all aware. So next Monday, it's next Monday for the same reason that I've read the document and explained just some mistakes. So they have to rearrange the grammar, and next Monday they go to Lima and they go to bring it to all the governments. So the environmental government, health government, and mining, ministries. Health ministries, environmental ministries, and mining ministries. So that's the way. So, and make it public as possible. I can ask them to bring up copy to the office.
Yes, thank you. If we have that, we will share it with all the colleagues. Thank you. We do have several more questions, so I'll go around. I'll take 3 and then we can do more. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Shaima from the Peru team, UNDP. You started the presentation talking about the ombudsman analysis and their role, but when the process moved on, I didn't see any kind of engagement from their side. So how is their role evolving from the process, and how much utilization you have done in that project?
Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Simona, and I cover the development impact group in UNDP. So the entire quality programming, including social and environmental standards, as well as performance monitoring and results reporting. So my first question is whether you're familiar with the social and environmental standards system of UNDP. And the other thing that I wanted to ask is that I'm actually looking into proposing a partnership, if at all possible, because the social and environmental standard system of UNDP is actually a great offering to all governments and local authorities, and that would help rationalize and systematize a little bit the work you're doing. I just mentioned very briefly because I have a team sitting on the other side of the room there. So the social and environmental standards of the organization include a stakeholder response mechanism, compliance auditing. So it's truly a system, and it works very well for us. It keeps us safe to ensure that our interventions are not creating any harm, are not doing any harm to the environment, and are also inclusive of all people, not generating conflicts with indigenous communities, indigenous populations. We think that at this point the system has reached a maturity, and we would like to be able to sell it to governments and to relevant authorities at all levels. And we thought that your experience helps us understand how big the problems are and where the problems actually exist. At the same time, if you get familiar with the system that we have, and we can together ensure that governments understand and use it, I think the results might be actually much more significant. Thank you.
So perhaps we'll go with those 2 for the moment, and then we will come back with Chris and Sako.
You already know what my memory is. Yeah, well, the ombudsman is definitely one of the main actors where you have to present your thing. So basically, it works like this. Like let's take one example. You monitor every week the water, so that those parameters with your pitch meters, and then when you see the pipes, then you take samples, you ship. At the end of the year, you write your report, or 6 months if you prefer. And when you write the report, then you share the report with all the actors involved, and then include the ombudsman, local authorities, regional government, ministries, and then of course with everybody through, we've seen public radio, local radio, community radios, and everything. So the ombudsman is definitely one of the main target to your position and one of the main stakeholders. But the problem sometimes with the ombudsman is that they don't have enforcement mechanism, a real one.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a bit frustrating for the community because the ombudsman, of course, stands for them and try to deal and negotiate and everything, but at the end, it's, in my experience, especially Latin America, it's kind of frustrating at the end working with the ombudsman because they are a lot of good willing, but then they don't have a real enforcement mechanism, and inside the government, it's often like stopped somewhere. But it's definitely, you're right, it's one of the main actors. Well, I'm going to thank you very much. And I know what I'm talking about, but I'm not that familiar with it. Whether I would really love to know more, and why not to share information and sharing.
That will take us further, because once governments understand that there should be standards in everything they do and in everything that companies do, then it will be much easier to ensure that there is no such harmful impact on the environment. And then there is also a mechanism to address all the stakeholders and people one way or another affected. So it has a very strong conflict prevention dimension. And again, it's extremely transformational for businesses and for governments for the way they do, everything they do. So I think that would be a great partnership that we could, start somewhere together. So I'm looking at my colleague there who can brief you on the system itself. We can also share that information. Casper is also very familiar with the system, and let's do it.
So on that note, I'll make a very brief intervention that one of the initiatives that we're doing is webinars in partnership with our colleagues at SEPA in Sweden, Environmental Governance Program, GOXI, and the NBSAP forum here at UNDP that hosts the webinars. So the topic is environmental governance and conflict prevention, and the one that we have on our list for March of 2018 is environmental and social safeguards and grievance mechanisms, including UNDP zones. So we would certainly like to follow up to work with you guys on crafting that content, because then people all over in our community can learn more about it, as well as maybe Flaviano for his work in greater depth. So we would like to follow up.
Just one last one from me, and I apologize. The system helped us to get the GCF accreditation, the Green Climate Fund. It's really very, very strong. I think within the development cooperation community, our safeguards are the strongest. It's not only about the criteria, it's also about, again, the system behind. So that's why I think it would be an incredibly powerful partnership to take it to the community, to take it to the government and to the business sector.
Yeah, maybe if you have a few minutes after that, we can discuss it.
Thank you for flagging it. We do have some more questions, both online and in the room, so I will start with Chris. You had.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much for the presentation. Chris Murgatroyd, Governance and Peace Building. And I guess it builds on a couple of the questions that we've already heard. The sense is that government and the company at the outset will agree a major deal, which will have massive, presumably, tax implications and revenue coming into the country. To what extent is there a presence on the ground and an interest from government in the capital or functionaries who are able to take ownership of some of these issues and intercede, or is it just very poorly resourced local government officials that have no capacity to engage? What's the practical experience?
And Sako, yes.
Thank you for the presentation. Sako from Sustainable Development Cluster. My question is how to interpret the data itself. So the mining site is naturally high concentration for the heavy metals. So how do you determine it's naturally occurred and due to the activity?
Well, the first question is, it changed country by country, but normally the mining concession are given to from the central government. In some countries, there is a control from the regional government. The only case I know is Mexico, in which there is also the local government that must be the authority to, well, they must authorize the use of their land. But that's the only case. It's Mexico. All the rest, like local government, just suddenly knows that, oh, that is mine, and because often it's considered like strategical, so it's done in secret.
Yeah.
And in some countries, it's not public. Like in Peru, there is a direct negotiation between companies and government, so you don't even know how much the government will take. So it's really like this. It's like you get up in the morning and say, "Oh, my land now is a mining," because everything below 1 meter is not yours. So there is a fun fact, depends from the countries, but in Ecuador, everything below 20 centimeters is owned by the state. So if you grow potatoes in Ecuador, it's probably
State shift.
So, and suddenly the state sell your underground. So, and that's also a trigger of conflict. So in that sense, I mean, having a transparent mechanism would help a lot. And maybe it's what, I mean, we were referring first, having kind of mechanisms that involve the central government and the regional government in set up together. I mean, at least make people aware. So another thing is like when we talk about indigenous communities, there is the ILO Convention 169 that enable communities to, in that case, states are theoretically obliged to consult communities about the use of their land. But there is a tricky question between, so the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples say that you have to obtain the consent of the community, but it's not legally binding. The legally binding instrument, ILO 169, says that you have to consult the community. But then if they say no,
They don't need the consensus.
you are consented, that's enough. And that happened in several cases. And now we are assisting at a preventive conflict in which communities, and that's particularly true in Colombia, for example, in which communities, they are doing indigenous consultation before even that there is a mining license, just to say, in our territory, we don't want it. And from one side, it's also understandable. I mean, we are talking about 500 years of history in which in Cerro de Pasco, the first time they dig a hole was in 1533, when Atahualpa was kidnapped by the Spanish. And the Spanish asked for a ransom, two full room of silver, and then they started to take silver in Cerro de Pasco to give it to Pizarro, and then Pizarro killed Atahualpa anyway. So it's like 500 years of history of foreign company, foreign power taking out everything and leaving them nothing. So it's understandable that now indigenous communities don't trust it. But that's why we have to move to a more transparent, more community-controlled mechanism. Thank you. And about your question, well, you're right. So sometimes you are lucky enough that you have a river flowing through the mine, so you can have samples upstream and downstream. So that's the case of Carrizalillo, the one in Mexico we saw. That's the perfect mining site because you have a river flowing into the mine. So you can take a sample just before the mine, and one just after, and you can see the difference. Sometimes it's not like this. Like Cerro de Pasco is on the top of the mountains, so there's no river flowing. The water is all stuck there, and it came out already polluted. And then, of course, say it's polluted because the area is mineralized. So you have to compare. Normally, you try to compare with another similar situation, maybe Carwamayo, 40 kilometers far away, or 20 kilometers. I mean, you try to find another way of comparison. Then at community level, from a science with higher standard, then you can actually measure which is like the mercury, for example, is easy because you have mercury and methyl mercury. The naturally occurring one is mercury, and the other one is methyl mercury. So you can actually measure which one is, but then you need a couple of $1 million instrument and a real lab and everything, so it's more complicated. But sometimes it's just a comparison between upstream and downstream, and it works 90% of the time, unless the mine is really on a mountain top. In that case, you have to compare with the near mountain, the close mountain.
Thank you, Flaviano. We have a question from one of our colleagues online, Natalia Mainu with the UNDP Health Team. And her question is, are doctors, nurses, or health professionals involved at the community level in any of the monitoring efforts?
Yeah, and especially in a health monitoring. So again, it depends a lot from case by case, but in a health monitoring, there are often health professionals that works, at least in the collecting the data. So like when they go into the hospital, they collect why they go there and which is the reason to get into the hospital. In some cases, this is not possible, and that's, for example, in Cerro de Pasco, because the health system is controlled by the regional government, and the regional government does not want to cooperate with. So actually, we cannot really have access to those data. And every time that we try, they try to stop us in every single possible way. But in most of the case, we, of course, I mean, especially in the monitoring of health, the health facilities are the main issues.
Thank you. So I think we're going to wrap up the session. We've had some very interesting questions, and we really appreciate the time you've taken to come down in the midst of all your travels. So thanks, everyone. And I would like to actually hand over to Anne to close. Anne sits in the background, but really she's the muscle behind this whole operation. And so she will close the session for the afternoon.
Sure, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I want just to say once again, Flaviano, thanks for coming and sharing your very interesting work with us. We thought it would be interesting to all of you because we felt that it underlines the need for us to work in an integrated manner across teams and across clusters and also bureaus. And I think in particular to make sure that we balance the need for economic development with very strong social and environmental standards through our work. So as was mentioned here, I mean, there are good efforts ongoing within UNDP, both on a project level, but also more in terms of the UNDP's own standards and mechanisms. So yeah, and once again, I think so that sort of sentiment that we need to work in an integrated manner, and most of the things that we're doing is interlinked. That was underscored by the position of the audience here and the question that you asked. So thanks to all for joining, also to the people that participated online from various UNDP country offices and Sweden and other agencies. And yeah, and I think we look forward to, we're here and we're working on the same issue. So yeah, let's continue doing that and working together, and we'll pick up those conversations on partnership and cooperations afterwards. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.